I formally call the meeting to order. Please remind me if I'm forgetting anything while I get this chair routine under my belt. Do we need a motion to, or do I just go right into my acknowledgement? Go right in. Fantastic. Okay. We respectfully acknowledge that the township of Cavan Monaghan is located on the Treaty 20 Mitchi Selgie territory and the traditional territory of the Mitchi Selgie Anishinabeg. We offer our gratitude to First Nations for their care for and teachings about these lands. May we honor these teachings. We'll move into the approval of the agenda. If everyone can just take a quick glance if they haven't already. And if everyone is in agreement, may I have a motion? And we'll have a seconder. Fantastic, thank you. We can move on to item 4. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest in the general nature thereof? No, we're good. Okay, fantastic. We don't have any closed session today. Move on to the previous meeting minutes that were held on January 18th, 2024. And those were circulated with their agenda earlier this week. Unless there's any issues with that, may I have a motion to pass those minutes? Thank you. Second. Great. Thank you. And then we can get into the beef of the agenda. Move into reports. Our first one is financial report. Karen Ellis.
Thank you, Chairman. The financial report for you today, and it's very simple in that we have not spent any money in 2024 yet. That situation will probably change in the near future. It will depend on our actions later in the future with regard to the draft heritage bylaw. If we accept and move forward, we'll have costs in terms of advertising, the notice for those changes, and with the discussion about the mural signage project will lead to further investigations. So at this point in time, the financial reports for you today, because it's very unexpected.
Through you, Chair, so just a mover and a seconder that the Municipal Revitalization and Heritage Advisory Committee received their financial report for information.
Okay, great. Okay. We have a first and a second. Okay. And then we can move into the report for the mural samples. Presented by Karen.
Again, thank you, Chair. So the report before you today, PEB 2024-16, was actually written by Messiah, who is enjoying a vacation in the sun south. The recommendation in the report is that the Municipal Revitalization and Heritage Advisory Committee review the options presented in the report PEB 2024-16 and provide direction to staff regarding the style and location of the new mural. So as the committee is aware, we have discussed a new mural and the concept of that new mural at Station Park. Previously, when we looked at the concept, we were going to have a history of someone arriving in Millbrook and their path through finding a place to live, where they're working, etc. The mural was to be located on the Station Park shelter. At the last meeting, however, we discussed and the committee accepted looking at alternatives in terms of what the mural display or the signage could look like. And thank you to John for providing me some examples of what is possible in terms of signage and mural-like projects. So township staff did look at them, and we've selected a number of options for your consideration, but we have provided all of the options for your review and discussion today. So staff are looking for some direction. And so we'd like to hear from you, and you can provide direction to us so we can move forward with the project. I will tell you 2 things moving forward. If we decide to change from our original plan of having a mural on panels on the end of the shelter and go to something else, that's fine, but it will have to go back to council for their review and consideration. And we do have a budget allotment of $7,000 in the current budget. So we have to live within the budget, or again, that would have to go back to council. But we would try very hard because we are very aware, Councilor Nelson, of the priorities of the township and keeping our budget in mind. So having said that, I will open it up and let you talk about what your thoughts are about the options and how you see us moving forward.
Or maybe if you provided the options, do you mind doing like a little walking us through? Like, I know we had time to look
Sure.
at this through our agenda that was circulated, but maybe if you could just walk us through.
Okay,
and go from there.
I apologize firstly, because I didn't know that staff were gonna take everything that I sent and that, "Huh, what do you want to pick?" It was kind of like Bridget said, well, can you show me some examples? So that's what I did. But anyway, it's still a good exercise.
We did go through and we picked 3 that we thought were appropriate for our situation, but we are not the decision makers, you are.
Right. Just a disclosure, as a landscape architect, I've done wayfinding and signage for years. And I've actually, I'm not tooting my own horn, but I've won a couple of awards for signage, so it's something near and dear to my heart, and acknowledging the direction that Millbrook's going and in its future. Thinking about this, I said, you know what, I wouldn't want to do a sign now. And then later on, if we get into a wayfinding program, that sign now becomes an albatross because it doesn't fit the program. So part of what I was thinking was, okay, if this is one of our first signs, maybe it's something that we should consider that it becomes a template for future signs. There are different signs that are attached to buildings. And then there are freestanding signs. And freestanding signs usually relate to a structure that sign wants to identify or describe information about. Or particularly with trails, etc., you're going to have mapping that shows trail directions, main trail, secondary trail, so on and so forth. So those signs become a freestanding, and then there's a whole plethora of freestanding styles. Some are just very simple signs that are set on a pedestal post, which I find look a little plain. Then you've got others that are sitting on double posts. Again, it's just an extension of that single post support. And then you get something which is a little bit more thematic or architectural, where that particular element the sign is sitting on has relevance in terms of a theme that maybe the municipality or the organization is doing. And that could take in the form of pedestals, pylons, so on and so forth. So I kind of set in a whole bunch of examples of what those might look like. And I guess if you wanted to go through these individually, then we can kind of see the differences between them. Majority of the signs that work the best are what they call embedded fiberglass signs. So they're a sign that has graphics. In the old days, we used to do, and they still do some of them, porcelain. So they take the graphic and they put it in porcelain and it's baked and it's almost indestructible. But they're limited in terms of size, and the embedded fiberglass is kind of the de facto standard that we use in most signage programs everywhere, and they're extremely robust. And so they take that graphic and they embed it with fiberglass material, including the backing material. So that sign, for example, you see in number 1, somebody could take a magic marker or a pen and they might be able to mark it, but it just wipes off like almost like a whiteboard. Even paint, somebody decides they want to spray paint it. It's very easy to remove. So it's extremely robust that way. So it's, in terms of resistance to vandalism, it's probably one of the best routes to go with. And it's the one that's more readily available through a majority of signage manufacturers.
Do you have any idea how much cost? I'm not gonna hold you to it, but just.
Well, I mean, the cost is relative to size and complexity. So for example, that sign there is more expensive than a square one. Because you're gonna basically charge you for a blank of material that's the size of the extremities. They cut off whatever they need to create that form, but you're still gonna pay for a square of material. So typically, we don't get into a lot of weird sizes unless we've got a robust budget, and that's what we want. So I've done some before where we made them in the shape of a leaf, and all the graphics was done that way. But I think in our case, probably a rectangular or square sign, probably the direction to go. That's an example of a typical fiberglass embedded sign on a single pedestal post. And I guess in some locations that it works fine, but because this is right in front of that particular building that it wants to describe, it might not seem terribly out of context. But sometimes I find them, they look a little lonely.
I think that's something just for the community information. When Bridget and I were looking at this, we talked a little bit of, okay, so the original plan was our mural, which would be mostly pictures and some words. If we're gonna transition to something more signage or something like this, we're gonna have pictures, and are we gonna have more words? Like, so this is something that we're looking to the committee to kind of decide what direction you want to go in, and then that will help decide maybe the format that fits the suit as well.
This is an example of a sign that's sitting between two vertical posts. And it's basically a blade. And they basically cut the top to give it some character, so it's not just a plain, rectangle. Here's a post that's on double pedestals. Again, you can go nuts with graphics. Photographs can be bled out so that they don't have distinct borders. That's another exercise in itself. So, you can look at some of these examples, and they'll give you some ideas too of graphics and just how the lettering reads or doesn't read, color contrast, that kind of thing.
You can use photos, or
Yeah.
artist renderings.
Yeah. All that stuff can be embedded into them in their.
And originally we planned to have like the background, for the Millbrook historic map, right, and then the art. That on top, is that something that's still
That's
achievable?
definitely, oh yeah, yeah. Here's another example of a sign that's sitting on a fence itself. Another style, shows you how they handle the photograph with shadow behind them. It's fairly rudimentary in terms of, I don't think it has a lot of panache.
Are we interested in the patch?
Well, you want people to take notice of it, right? Without it necessarily being neon. This is something again that something that the Niagara Parks Commission, Parks Canada, a lot of institutions favor because color contrast is simple to get black and white. But the text form and everything else is very rigid and uniform, and it has a certain appeal. Now we're getting into something that's a little more thematic. And this particular example, it's representing corn. And the particular area that this signage is being put into was something that the community was known for. Here's a larger scale map that's showing you the map of the area you're in, and then the specific elements that they want to highlight. And sorry, if you go back up, you can see the scale in terms of the silhouettes of the people. So it's not necessarily a small sign. But when you break it down, if you look at the side panels with the pictures and the text, they are quite small in general overview of the whole thing. Another example of a smaller sign, but they use 3 of them to highlight specific elements rather than having them all in one block. This particular example, they decided to do it as 3 individual signs, but the color contrast is interesting.
And in your professional opinion, is it okay to ask questions, Jen? Yeah. In your professional opinion, John, is it like having more than one pedestal an advantage to just having one bigger one? Or does it matter? No.
Well, we'll see some other examples, and sometimes, and I apologize, but sometimes what I like to do is get the client or the people that are interested in what you're doing, let them see something that they gravitate to rather than steering them. And then if they're going the wrong direction, then I might have some input. But yeah, I mean, it all comes down to the context of the sign, its location, what it's trying to do. You know, here's another example, just there, they've got 4 individual signs. But the grandeur of that photograph and what it's highlighting is massive. So that panoramic type setting sort of says, okay, you know what, these work. And the pedestals themselves sort of act almost like a speaker's box, you know, and it's, so in that context, it seems to work. This is more of a pylon style. It's a wayfinding marker. So from a distance, you can see it just by the scale of what the sign is sitting on and then the sign itself. This is another example of a large mural type unit that's put on a structure. The disadvantage we have with the gazebo is it doesn't have any solid sides. It's an open air structure sitting on posts. So if I put a panel like that on, now I'm going to create a wall, and the structure is no longer open. And from SEPTED, which is Crime Prevention Through Design standards that we deal with all the time, it's frowned upon. In this example, it works because it's a building wall. Again, another example of this color, mixture of text, graphics, photographs. Same thing, only in this case it's a pylon, which matches the pylon that you saw in the previous photograph. So they sort of got a system going there. Nice mix of graphics and photographs and text, color. I don't think we can get into something that grand, you know, it would be
Or you
nice.
just have to be kind of like.
No, again, this is a different type of pylon design, but it's quite effective. It's in terms of scale, you can see that the sign is about 6-7 feet high. So you get some advantage with height. I find sometimes these work better than one that's tilted the other way, because it's just, you're supporting less mass, and it's something that sort of breaks the mold of most signage that's done typically on a horizontal plane. This is something that's probably similar to what the content that we want to put on our sign, with the historical photographs, timeline, backdrop, etc. This again is another example of a theme. Here they're using flame cut Cork-10 steel plate. Very effective, very expensive. Unless we find a philanthropic investor that wants to do something, or somebody that's got a student that wants to test out their plasma cutter and here, test it out on this. Again, this is a standard double pedestal sign. Same thing, but you look at the difference between the two. One is monotone, primarily with a white background, when you're using the blue background for more contrast. But sometimes the graphic exercise is another meeting in itself. We get style. What do we like? What colors do we want to use? You know, do we want to have a sign that's, like this one, for example, is totally different than some of the others in terms of how the photographs or the illustrations are put onto the sign itself. But if there's a style that we prefer, then that we use either to sort of fine tune it. That's another example of how that particular sign system works with the theme. But you can see how the graphics on the backside are solid. Obviously, text on the back end, but see the previous photograph. The support posts have a specific design that's relative, that's tied in architecturally to the features that they're trying to describe it essentially for the next photo. It's just a plain tubing. Again, very simple, monotone color.
Questions? Want to just have a discussion?
So of course, we picked an expensive one.
There's always something about that I feel it's expensive.
Yeah, I can tell you from the staff perspective, we thought it was original, kind of fit the environment in which it will be located. We thought it spoke to kind of the nature of Cabin Monument, in that we have beautiful rolling hills, we have significant environmental features, and we felt that we could, have a balance of photographer and artist rendering and a few words to speak about why it's important. Kind of the area. So that was the first one. The second one we picked was the pattern, this pattern, that because it was similar to what we had already presented to the committee, there seemed to be some level of buy-in, and again, it provided an opportunity for artwork or photographs with the map and a few. And then the third option was it's option with photographs, and again, we could do artwork or photographs, but it also gave us opportunity to have some description of the history. We had no idea of the price, but we are aware of the budget, so we need to keep that in mind. And I think the other thing that Bridget and I spoke about at length was if we choose to go with signage that has more words, that's something that we will have to work very hard on. Because it can be challenging for all of us to agree on the wording of their sign.
So, this particular mural, its intent is as a gateway mural?
So through you, Chairman Stewart, to the members of the committee. This mural came up because at the time there was some question about whether we would be able to preserve the mural on the building. So it was an option, we looked at options to move that mural. And then we decided, okay, we're gonna maintain it as best we can, property owners stick with that, so now we have a budget, an operating budget. Every year to do some touch-ups to it. So the mural at Station Park is another, so it was never really. We never really came down and said, yes, it's definitely a gateway mural, it was intended to provide some additional information. To tie it to downtown, to kind of draw people who are interested in heritage and history, and draw them into downtown. Experience the beautiful downtown and the area that we have on the trails, and to experience. Have a lot of enjoy the history of Melbourne and.
So one option, and I can very quickly, in a matter of days, get some preliminary quotes based on, let's say, a sign that's so big, independent of what it's sitting on. So that you can take that from your budget and say, what have I got left over for what we call structural support? And also too, this sign could be one of maybe one or two in the same area. I'm just putting it out there. So I had no idea till I started walking all over. I mean, I've been all over the place. Found an old railway trestle. The amount of land that the rails went through here is quite significant and quite interesting. So something that I want to promote. It's a huge historical factor, and you start realizing when this was built and some of these grade changes, 40, 50 feet of fill and cut in an era where they did not have hydraulic earth moving equipment. And the hand cut head walls for some of the culvert structures and stuff, and just like, well, this is, we're talking 1800s. This is amazing. And this people need to see this. They need to walk it. What a great selling point to bring people into the community to experience some of this stuff. Now, there's a whole bunch of other mechanics that we're going to branch into that's probably going to take way too much time, but talking to private property owners and access to some of the trails and whatever. But there are some magical places in this area that I don't think people are totally aware of. So it's kind of like the signage itself is a great indicator to people of some historical parts of Millbrook that the average Joe would think it's just a downtown core.
I think through you, Chairman Stewart, I think the original mural downtown that's on the building, there was a train and that was directly related to the history of Millbrook. That was the first.
That's right.
So that was the first kind of.
Yeah.
Splash into that history.
Yeah.
I think, if the committee chooses to go with more of a sign as opposed to a mural on the side of the shelter, I think it's something that there could be more.
Right. So,
As budget permits and as,
right.
depending on the direction of the committee.
So, yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, so sort of pulling everything together, I think the options presented are fantastic to sort of get the creative juices flowing. I think we sort of need to think I think we almost need to define what the intent and the scope of work is for the project that we've been allotted. Is it sort of sticking to the original concept that was essentially brought forward by our previous chair and present the concept and the content that he originally intended and that we had agreed upon. And it's just sort of massaging out the graphic presentation itself and then how it is installed based on these type of examples? Or is it sort of taking a little bit of a swing to the side and sort of reimagining the concept in itself? Is it sort of, or are we sort of leaning towards a bigger concept of more signage throughout Millbrook and surrounding areas, or is this sort of just one in itself? I don't know, I just sort of, that's the feeling I get from discussion and previous discussions of the mural when others were here from previous meetings. So I guess maybe that's where I feel we need to just keep ourselves a bit organized, is what, maybe just defining the intent and the scope within our previous agreements, but not to say that it can't be changed, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that was my intent to take this off.
That's fine, that's,
Big bunch
so
trail.
the idea, I sort of just wanna pull us back in, because with all those images, it get, as I said, it gets the juices flowing, and where could we go from here?
Yeah.
And we would start talking about the rail, like you could start getting into something very, very interesting and a larger project in itself. I guess I'm just trying to stay true to the original intent and sort of what was the intent of that original mural when it was brought forward, was really to tie back to the one on the building that we were, I don't want to say losing, but it is slowly deteriorating even with, you know, yearly maintenance. And sort of just, you know, and the intent to bring it to where it's being proposed is because that was the original location of the train station. So I guess it's just, how do we go from here? There's lots of sort of big unanswered questions. So do we just decide, okay, this is the content, and then develop the graphic itself, and then maybe the graphic, and based on, I have here scale and setting, then it will sort of dictate how we want to install it, like it goes hand in hand. I think we just have lots of ideas. Maybe we just need to pick something and develop that, and then it will sort of lead us where to go from there.
So I guess I'll put out the question, do we think this is gonna be the only sign we're ever gonna do in Millbrook?
That's a big question.
That is a big question. And I would put it back on the community. Because there's nothing, this was a project identified, as Jim said, that was to relate back to the original, you know. But there's nothing to say that this community can't say, okay, so next year we want to do another sign or another project. And this is what the project will it is. You know, it always has to be, you know, evaluated as part of the budget review, and the committee would have to be the majority of this is the project we want to do, and the project would have to take into consideration our terms of reference and what we're here to accomplish. But that is a question that you need.
And I completely understand what you're saying. Do we just have one little project isolated in itself, then down the road, there's other signage and nothing sort of ties together.
Right.
So I'm kind of thinking like, what do we need to do first? And then like I'm thinking, okay, do we just sort of focus on the graphic itself, the content and how we want to present it? And then once we have that, maybe we can come up with almost like a standard in the sense of, okay, what we're trying to present in this specific location lends itself to two posts. And we want to have it rectangular or some of like the options that were selected as preferences. Or, and then, you know, once we have those, can we say, okay, if we do down the road, want to have something along the railway trail, we can tie it back by even the color or the profile of the structural members. So that it doesn't always have to be a pedestal or a double post, but there's like a pattern language through all of it. Is that a possibility through what you've done in your
100%.
signage? Okay,
100%. I mean, as part of the revitalization and historical advisory committee, we want to look at how to revitalize the community, not just Millbrook, but Capital, also the historical aspects of this community. We're doing great jobs with the bylaws and everything else, but we have to up it. We have to up the ante in terms of getting the public to understand more about who we are, where we come from, some of the attributes that we have. How do we encourage investors to come into Millbrook? Bring in a business, a large business, maybe, who knows what. All those things are relative to how the town markets itself. And if you look at what I call, I pine for, and I was in Savannah, Georgia just last week, and going through the core area, and we're talking buildings going back to the 1700s. But the wayfinding program they had was phenomenal. And you could basically walk around and just, there's a building right here. They have walking tours and stuff like that, but and a lot of universities have wayfinding programs and signage, which is thematic and carries all the way through. So even from a distance, if I see a particular color code, I know where that's going to be a building that's tied into the things that I want to go see. So I think this sign is a one of, because right now the council is looking at getting this sign built and paid for. This is our budget. We have some content that we want to put in. We have monies to spend. But I think we need to sit there as a group and say, okay, if we're going to do this one and think of wanting to promote more, then do we want to do, as I said right at the beginning, do we want to do one now, one later, and next thing we know, we just got this mishmash of signs all over the place and nothing fits. So part of my interest in getting involved with this committee was to bring my experience and advice to sit there and help guide us through programming and opportunities to do things and do it in a way that we're not having to go backwards and replace signs because we use the wrong material, or now we've got somebody else involved and we're doing marketing, and if we'd only done it this way or that way, we wouldn't be redoing it. So kind of like, if we're going to do this sign, let's think of a big picture and what other signs might we have, and if we do that, then what might we want this sign to sit on so that it becomes something that people will recognize from the distance and say, well, that's a sign of interest because I'm familiar with that because I see it elsewhere throughout the community, not just town itself. So then that's almost another exercise. What might that support mechanism for the sign be? So I think to me it's a twofold exercise. One is nailing down the content, the graphics, the colors, how that might necessarily look like. Do we want something that is going to be affixed or freestanding? And if it's freestanding, how do we want to see it freestanding?
so I guess that comes back to the committee. We sort of have a few decisions to make. Do we want to, because the way I interpret it, in order to move forward with this one sign and doing it in such a way within a larger concept, is do we want to take on essentially signage elsewhere down the road? It might not be this year, because in order to come up with these standards, guidelines for our signage, we would have to take that on as a project in itself and then use this as our precedent moving forward. So I guess we first have to just agree, do we want to do signage in the future elsewhere? And we're going to be using the signage at the train station as our sort of original precedent setting project. So I guess, would it make sense for the committee first to agree, okay, yes, this is something we want to do? Because if we do, then we can either just say, okay, that's fine, we'll just, like you were saying, we'll just deal with the signage that we've been discussing, the mural as we've been discussing as a one-off. And it is what it is, and we'll figure out what it's gonna look like and get it done within our budget. If we don't, then we can say, okay, we can maybe take a little more time, think this through, come up with their guidelines, like not rushing, it's not the right word, but putting a lot more thought and so what am I trying to say? Sort of just building the background so that we can have more projects in the future, coming back to what we sort of settled upon. So I guess first is just as the committee, as the members, do we want to sort of take that upon ourselves as future signage elsewhere and use this as our precedent setting? And what does people feel?
Through the chair here, I think we should start out with the sign that in the future, this group or another group can carry on with that thing, but they had to be indestructible signs to start with.
Okay.
And like whether we put up another sign next year or 5 years from now, they go from the original blend on, like you said. I would think.
Okay. I agree with that.
Nancy, what are your thoughts?
I agree with you.
Yeah, okay. So, check mark, we figured that out. We want to use this as a precedent setting signage. John, how do you feel if we were your client coming to you, we have an initial concept, we now are thinking we want to use this as our initial precedent setting one. What would you recommend to us as your client? How do we move forward? What would you be like, okay, you guys, here's your checklist, here's my checklist. Where do we go from here? I'm sort of looking at you with your professional expertise and experience. So you sort of just lead us.
Well, first of all, as Nelson was mentioning, the sign has to be indestructible. Nothing's indestructible,
Well,
but pretty darn close. And we put signage in places that, I mean, if it was Bosnia, maybe it would have not survived, but it's some pretty rough areas and they stood the test of time. So I would probably, what I could do is at our next meeting, and Karen, if we want to fast track it, then maybe we don't, but I can bring samples of some of the sign technology and the materials. And also, as I said earlier, get some quotes very quickly that and I'm going to go backwards. If we provide the supplier with as much graphic content done, in other words, if we've done the Photoshop and the Illustrator so that we've got the typing and coloring and all that sort of stuff worked out ahead of time, for them then to embed the graphics onto their sign material is pretty straightforward and easy to price.
Okay.
Then we can get an idea of, okay, we're going to get a sign that's, 6 by 3, whatever. And then that total amount that we have, now we've got X left over. And then we can look at, okay, so we've got so many dollars that we can spend on some sort of a structural support. Again, I have not worked with a lot of wealthy municipalities, so phasing is the name of it. So we've gone as far as the basics and then we add on. And over a period of 5 years, that sign went from to them, wow. Yeah, you have to wait longer to get the end of it, but you can do it with phases rather than cutting corners and then putting up something that's just Band-Aid approach. So,
So can I just ask a question? So when you say do it in phases, so over 5 years, so it takes 5 years to get the sign installed on the site?
no. For example, we've got $7,000 right now. And I'm gonna ask this question, can we possibly use town staff to install this like a concrete footing for the sign? Is that contracted?
I don't know the answer to that question. We can find out.
Okay,
Sure.
because the more we can do in-house, you save money. I just did a shelter structure and contractor came back with a price of $12,000 per footing. And I'm going, it's obscene. And we got the local people to do it for $750.
Yeah.
Huge savings, right? So sometimes the Ways and Means Committee can really kick in. You can get a lot of stuff done for less. But when I say phasing, for example, City of Hamilton, we opted to build the structure first. And it had lights on it. And so we basically said to the public, this is like a light, a street light. Oh, okay, looks nice. And then 2 years later, we put the signage on. And then everybody went, oh, now I see what you're doing, that's awesome. Why didn't you do it all at once? So we phased it. So it could be done, it could be on a yearly thing, right? We don't have to do it for 5 years, we can do it every year. And maybe that's a point that this committee puts forward to council, that we have a budget every year for signage. That we can add another sign following the same theme and style that we use elsewhere to pick key points that we want to advertise or promote. So to answer your question, number one would be to nail down what we want to do graphically. So what color is Millbrook? Well, I think our corporate colors are the greens.
Yes, and we do have clear print guidelines that we will have to.
Good, so then that's to me the start. When we have that type of typology and other graphic standards to follow, that makes it really simple. Now we sort of add what's the content in terms of verbiage, and like we were saying earlier, Karen, if we've got more words we want to add, that would be a second sign.
If we started with something that we could keep adding to down
Yeah.
the road year after year,
Yeah.
whatever.
So it sounds like what we need to do, and I think this is sort of coming back to our meeting in January, was working out the graphic in its entirety itself. Because to go to get a quote, they're gonna need something. So can we assume we're gonna be working in, based on what we've discussed, even if we do go down the road of this embedded fiberglass, we're gonna be working with something square, rectangular. Wise, maybe if we had a curve or something like that, that's not huge. But we can assume, let's say the basic graphic is going to be square, rectangular. And then I guess it's just how do we proceed with developing that graphic? If there's someone from the committee that would like to take that on. Because I don't think that it's not something that cuts back to the tap at all. Because I think there was just some difference of opinion in regards to the graphic that was presented at the last meeting. So it's just sort of updating it to be a little more current and modern. So I don't know if that means switching artists or someone taking that on themselves. But John, like you were saying, the first thing we need to do is get that graphic almost into like a 90% review date to be able to then present it to someone for a quote, and then it can be modified to suit and finalized once we know how it's going to be installed and presented.
Well, I'll volunteer.
Okay, fantastic.
So, just fine tuning what we have and what we can do. I always start from the top down, so I've got X number of dollars. What size sign can I put up? And I don't want to put up a 10-point font. In order to, yeah, so, you know, and again, just from my experience, the font size has to be a certain dimension. And you go backwards from there. So if the font size is so big, depending on the amount of words I'm gonna have, it's gonna create a sign length that's X. I've got photographs, and they've got to be visible. It's then all of a sudden, so on my computer, I'll design it and say, oh, 12 by 8 feet, too big. So now I've got to start. And if I know now that we have the potential of maybe second sign to complement the first one, okay, now I can start to squeeze down and say, okay, what is the most important thing that we want to promote on the sign. Fine tune that, get an idea of what our costs are, get an idea of our graphic content, coloring, et cetera, and then say, okay, let's look at, and then I can certainly do that as well as, here's some examples of what we might use as a standard to support the sign.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
Great.
You know, and
That
I,
will have to go back to council for approval before we get too far along.
right. So I mean, I guess the verbiage to council would be, we thought about this and we realized that as a committee, this is not just a one-off. And then as a result, we see additional signs coming and part of a municipal-wide program, you gotta think of certain standards, like the graphic standards the township has to fit in with the signage, right? And just so you feel good about it, Nelson, I did a sign program for a municipality where we ran into budget problems in the matter where we went to. And we ended up going and using a precast concrete decorative street wall to support the sign with a specialized bracket. And we did that at a cost that was like a tenth of what it had been custom. So we looked at what we could pull off the shelf. And all of a sudden now it was attractive and it did the trick without necessarily being really custom.
So do we need a motion to sort of capture our discussion here today?
I'll look to Karen, through you, Chair. Given that there is some outstanding direction of council, is there anything in this discussion that needs to be brought forward next in minutes, or what does staff need to proceed?
So I think we do need a motion to say that, okay, so we've gravitated from the mural on Station Park shelter to more of a sign style on a pedestal or whatever, whatever. And that further information that will be brought forward in terms of the graphics, the design, in accordance with township standards and potential costs. And we'll be looking for that.
So, okay, so we don't necessarily have to go to council and say, here's a concept of what we're thinking of doing different from what.
I
you
think
originally
before we
agreed.
finalize anything, we do have to put in. But I think if you, because we need more information before we can go to council, so if you come back at the next meeting, if that gives you enough time. Excuse me. Then we can have a look and see, you know, are we all in, or are they, oh, John, this is not what we thought was gonna happen. But I think once we kind of come to grips with, okay, this is the concept of the signage program we would like to see, and confirm that, you know, it's in accordance with standards, and then we can come and present to council. This is what we would like to do. Here is why we want to do it. Here's the concept, here's potential costs, and here's, you know, we may want to even roll out a little information about we anticipate we would like to do additional sign program in the future.
Through you, Chair, I do have a question as it relates to the graphic. So council approved the concept of building upon the story of the train station as it relates to the journey of a new member to the community. Is that concept changing, or based on the graphics you're going to?
No, I
continue
think
to
we can
submit?
stick with the same concept, right?
Yes. Because we agreed on the concept and images and sort of the watermark of the survey. It was just sort of tweaking what was presented by the previous artist to make it a little more current. Okay. So we're looking to John. So let's make it look
Thanks. And then in terms of where it's currently being proposed to be affixed, I don't know if we can answer this, but the original direction was to affix it to the shelter. However, I did hear what John said about that's not necessarily industry standards. So are we looking, because I can incorporate that into the motion, if you're now moving from an affixed sign to a freestanding, again, that narrows down kind of some of the things that we bring back.
Yeah, because, I mean, when I heard originally that the sign is going on the gazebo, I'm kind of going, well, if you put it above the siding panels, right? Now it's gonna block the gazebo. If you put it on the siding panels, it's too low. So then I kind of like, well, let me just think about this for a minute, right? But I think it's definitely in the same location.
Same location, but a freestanding.
Freestanding.
sign. Wonderful.
Freestanding, yeah.
Thank you.
And that will be part of. Yeah.
I'm sure everything. Do you think that's sufficient for reference today?
Think, just to make sure that the committee does agree, I can read out kind of some of my notes about our discussion. And then if you agree, we can move and second that discussion. If we don't, please provide me clarity.
Okay.
So I have that the Municipal Revitalization and Heritage Advisory Committee received report PE 2024-16 for information. And and that the committee will move forward with preparing a design based on the original concept presented to council. However, the signage would be used as the committee wants to consider the signage as a template, should there be future signage existing. However, the same location will still exist, but look towards a freestanding display. And that the committee will come back to bring future information to the future meeting. Does that give
I think that's-
everything, Karen?
That's a perfect summary, I think.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect. So with that, I would need a mover and a seconder.
May I have a motion, please, based on. Thank you, Nancy. And a seconder? Thank you.
And then everyone's in agreement?
Yes. All in favor?
Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, great. Okay, good progress. Now that was a lengthy discussion, but I think it was an important one, and I think gets everyone excited. So I guess moving forward, just as a side note, we have our signage project for this year. Now that we've sort of got this concept of other signs, if you're walking, driving, let's sort of start thinking about a sign for next year or signs.
I got 50.
Okay, good. Get them down on paper.
Yeah, all right, sure.
Okay. Okay, let's make sure I have the right paperwork in front of me. Okay, we can now jump into item number 8, general business, and the first one is the proposed draft heritage bylaws. The Karen,
Thank you, Chair Stewart. So on today's agenda, there are 4 draft bylaws for your review and consideration. We are carrying on with the program that we've started in terms of updating our heritage bylaws to bring them in compliance with the current legislation requirements. So we are going bylaw by bylaw, doing some bylaws only of the original Millbrook bylaws or Cabot bylaw. More than one property in the bylaw. So we are breaking them down into management sections. So for you today, there are 4 bylaws. So these bylaws have been reworked to add new information. The original work was done by the heritage coordinator that we hired under special funding we had. Connor is no longer with us, so but we're using the information he provided. Chairman Stewart, with her expertise, has reviewed and suggested some revisions to the bylaw, and they have been considered by staff and incorporated. So the bylaws before you today have had a thorough review, and you're suggesting we're bringing them to you today to have your thoughts provided to us for final revisions before we before you authorize us to provide notice to the property owners and the general public and bring the bylaws to council. So you will be seeing many more bylaws in the future as time and energy permits.
So again, these were attached to the digital agenda that we received. Everyone had time to read through them. Is there any comments? Questions, concerns?
Once these bylaws are approved, do you contact the property owners, or have you already contacted?
So what will happen if you're okay with the content of the bylaw today? We will prepare the notice of our intention to amend the bylaw, and that will be provided by Coach Plus prepaid mail to property owners. We will also put a notice in Norfolk Times. It will be a notice with just the board, doesn't have all the details in it. The information would be provided on the township website as well. And then after 30 days, we'll allow them to provide any comments and then. So property owners have already been advised at the very start of the process that this work was ongoing. We did hold a public meeting or public information session. And the bylaws that we have taken to council so far, we have had no objections. So we cautious that we move forward, that this is really a project to bring us into compliance, conformance with current legislation and provide direction to both this community and property owners in terms of if they wish to make changes. And we have clear direction on what we should do.
Well, when they bought these properties, they would have had that designation under the previous bylaw, right?
Through June, so yes, that is true, but the previous bylaws were skimpy. Yes, they did not provide a lot of information in terms of the heritage characteristics of properties that we should be really looking to
Okay.
preserve or.
So now they're
So
very
yeah, it's got
specific.
into a question. It made it very difficult for both property owners and committee members to assess proposals for change. So this more detailed information is intended to provide you as committee members specific direction or information when somebody comes forward with a proposed change.
Okay.
If I may, the bylaws that are being modified were from the 80s and they followed the template that was set out by the government in the 80s. So other than basically saying it's a building of heritage significance for very basic justification, the new requirements by the government have changed how the bylaw is actually laid out as a document itself, but it also has a section called heritage attributes. As Karen was explaining, that was the issue because a number of years ago, we had a significant renovation come in front of us and we moved the bylaw, and it was, at the end of the day, there was nothing we could do because there was nothing in the bylaw. So not only does it help the committee should something like that occur again, but it's also updating to what the actual provincial standards are in regards to heritage bylaws. And we have also had an instance where one of the updated bylaws, once the owners had that 30-day period, they came back to us and provided photographic evidence, essentially saying, oh, this particular element that has been included in the draft really isn't a heritage attribute, and they sort of explained why and when it was built, and so that it was modified before it was all signed, sealed, delivered, and approved by council. So everyone has, that's why there's that 30 days that have time to put up their hand and say if they have an issue with it. So unless there's any other questions, I guess I can just have a motion. Okay,
So it'd be that the Municipal Revitalization and Heritage Advisory Committee support the proposed draft heritage bylaws. If there's no changes, it would be as presented.
okay, fantastic. May I have a seconder? Thank you, John. All in favor? Fantastic. Okay, great.
We will see meetings in people, and we will send notes of it by just has to be emailed to property owners. Probably.
Moving on to our last item is our 2024 work plan. So we know we typically review this at every meeting. Is there any How do we want to approach this? Because I know Bridget usually goes through this.
Yeah, there is one thing that is not on the work program that needs to be added, it will be added for the next
Okay,
meeting, is that at the last meeting, I believe, we agreed to participate with the Millbrook County Historical Society in updating the cultural mapping. Okay, so that partnership arrangement will be added to the work. There is no budget allocated to that particular part of the work program, but it will be noted and we continue to update as things move forward in that.
okay.
And since I'm on the historical society, I brought that forward at our last meeting, everybody talked about it.
Okay. Should we add, I know it won't have any budget associated with it, but just so it's not lost, should we add, maybe just under, or I don't know, under or like a 6A or sorry, I guess it would be a 5A, sort of our signage initiative.
Through the chair, we can update the comments with the discussion today, and then as it continues to move forward, we'll just keep maintaining those updates.
Fantastic, okay, just so it's not written down, I forget.
So just adding to that, would it be something this committee would do would be to ask council to have a rolling signage allotment.
I think that would come up in budget time, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Next year.
So my thought is if we move forward, not if, as we move forward with our murals, we'll call it mural just because that's what it's there, but our signage project, and then communicate our intent for the larger concept of signage projects, then that's when we can present it, like use our example and then say, look at what great initiative we did with this one, we can move forward with others and carry that forward. It's a yearly project. Okay, great.
Then through you, Chair, if there is no other changes other than the two discussions, if you could do a motion that the Municipal Revitalization and Heritage Advisory Committee approve the work plan and updates as discussed.
Okay, fantastic. I have a motion. Thank you, Nancy. Secondary? John, oh, sorry, I didn't see you. Okay, great. Okay. And, all in favor? Okay. I believe that's it, unless I've forgotten something.
Just your motion to adjourn, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
And if we can have a motion to adjourn the meeting? Thank you, John. Secondary, Nancy, all in favor? Thank you.